Title of this sermon today is Embrace the Cross. And here in Matthew chapter 16, I want to start in verse 21. And this is Jesus talking to his disciples, and at this point, he's resolutely setting himself to his cross. He understands the moment. As you follow him in his life, you see that everything that he did, I don't know at what point he became aware that he was the Lamb of God. I know that he didn't have any advantages other than being born of the Holy Spirit and not receiving Adam's sin nature. But aside from that, the Bible is clear. He had to suffer every way that we do and yet be without sin. Otherwise, he couldn't pay the price for us. Otherwise, he couldn't wash us with his blood. He couldn't deliver us. Also, he could not be the merciful high priest that he is, who knows how valuable that is. He knows. I know sometimes when we're pressed and it's very difficult, and maybe our bodies are screaming, our minds are numb and confused with the pain, it's searing us like a hot iron in our soul. And one of the first lies that Satan will creep in there with, it's common, is nobody knows, nobody understands. You are alone. It's a lie. If we're Christians, which we are here, and if you're a Christian, the truth is you're never alone. More than that, I was reflecting on this a little bit this morning. I don't know, it's not as if I've formulated this into a real crystal clear, concrete thought, but I feel moved to say it, so I'm going to say it. Consider suffering. It was mentioned a little bit earlier. This is a moment when we can't really escape the suffering. We see the universe, the world, the state of mankind is falling apart at the seams. We're at that moment. This reminds me of the moment when God announced that there was going to be a flood, because he looked down and he saw that the hearts of men were only evil continually. It was filled with murderous violence. What is it? I mean, are we used to hearing this news? Think about this. Just reflect on this for a moment. Don't you think it's stunning that it doesn't shock us that we flip on the news? Or, maybe it's your habit, you wake up and you check your laptop or your phone. A lot of us get the news on our phones. Why is it that it seems normal that one of the stories is going to be somebody prominent has been molesting children? Why is it normal when we hear what happened with Kevin Spacey? Why doesn't that shock us? Or Harvey Weinstein? That's normal. And look, people like actors like Corey Feldman have been saying this is the state of Hollywood. I'll tell you what I know just from having been a journalist for a short time, and that is, that ain't just Hollywood. Okay? That's here in sleepy little Russellville, Arkansas, population 30 grand or whatever it is. I mean, you don't know what's happening, but that's normal. Why is it normal that we wake up and it's the news that somebody just opened fire on a crowd of concert goers in Las Vegas, Nevada, or just plowed through the streets somewhere and killed people? You see, I mean, it's very, very dark at this moment. So I was reflecting on suffering. It's something that the Lord was leading me to and through, thinking on suffering. And it can be very beneficial. It can be very healthy for you to look on your own personal suffering. Because if it's unresolved, it'll hamstring you. You won't walk or run freely. It will lie to you. It gives you a fake perception about what is happening, about who you are, about what God's intentions are for you. So it is necessary for all of us to be aware of those things, especially if it is currently painful to you, or if things that remind you of it bring forth deep pangs of hurt for you. You need to look at that. You should examine that, bring it before the Lord, clarify it. So he was instructing me sort of to walk through that, which is something I do with fair regularity. And look, you feel it again. I was feeling it again. It brought me to tears, and I was just writhing with it, in a sense more like a spectator now than a participant, because there's so many years now between that little boy who was hurt so much and those moments. But I was feeling it almost like a father would for his son. It's a pretty bizarre thing, but I know that's not me anymore, and I've been so healed since that time, but just convulsing with the pain of it. And the Lord just showed me, look, every person has an allotted amount of suffering for a purpose, carefully designed. You are precious in your Father's sight. There's nothing more precious. If you want to understand that, think about the cross. You just think about that. And look, think about it that Jesus came to rescue you. Don't think, look, Jesus came to die to wipe away sin. He did, but it's personal. He came for you. He came for you personally. He hurt with your hurt. He bore your pain, your personal shame. He ran through the gauntlet of the enemy, as we heard, as light comes into this dark world, dying by a million cuts. How do you estimate the level of his suffering? Look, it's not just at Calvary, it's every day. So, whatever suffering that we have a part of his suffering. All the suffering is his suffering. That's what I'm trying to say. And no one has suffered more than the Father. Because even the Son, when he gave up all that he gave up and he came down into this cesspool that hurt, it hurt him to be here. It's painful to be here. You know what that's like? You ever come to somebody's rescue when they are really at the end of their tether? You ever walk right into the worst kind of situation? Could be a deathbed situation, might be a domestic violence kind of situation. Look, when you go in there, you're leaving your peace like Jesus did. You will leave it. You can't hold on to it and wade into it. You're going to experience it if that's what they're in the middle of, and it will wrench you. You will go through it with them. The purpose is you go in to bring them up, to bring them out, to offer some comfort. That's what the Lord did for us. I mean, he had to give that up and hurt so much, but he didn't give his only son. He didn't. I don't know about how you are. It's always been easier for me to adore Jesus, to attach my affection to him and see him like the lover of my soul, my rescuer, the one who came for me. It's been harder to see the Father like that, which is just a consequence of sin in this world. That's the bottom line. A lot of guys have trouble with that, a lot of girls too, for that matter, understanding the love of a father. We can look at them as distant, disapproving, maybe even tyrannical. It's a fundamental problem. It's one of the places that Satan attacks first, rightly so, because of the damage. It's hard to estimate how far that will transmit through your soul, your life, and then your circle of influence, if that's broken. But I realize that the Father has suffered with all suffering. All the suffering is his. You understand? What you experience when you get to that place where you're at the end of your tether, who's hurting more, you or the Father? That's an easy question to answer. I'm telling you, all of us know the answer to that question. It hurts him more, but he allows it for a purpose. So that was just an insight that he brought me to when I was considering it, and that's, I think, why he led me to this place. So I want to begin here when Jesus is telling his disciples, and he knows what's coming. He's aware at this moment of where he's going, and he's utterly resolved to it. There's nothing that's going to keep him from it. And the way I put it is there's nothing that's going to keep him from rescuing me. He's going to get to me. So here in verse 21, it says, "From that time Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed and raised again on the third day." So Peter's the quickest to talk in the bunch. It's part of why he was useful as a leader. He was quick to act too, but he had to be trained. And so here's Peter. Once again, he speaks right up. He took him aside, which, look, we've all done this. Haven't you done this? I've done it. I've told the Lord, look, I see what you're doing here, but it would be a better idea if Or maybe you didn't say it out loud, but you did it with your choices, right? Where you know the Lord was clear on something and you kind of made a bargain with yourself. Well, I'll do this next best thing and maybe that will appease him. So consider how arrogant a thing that is, to think that you might offer the Lord some advice, but he's going to straighten him out. Peter's going to pull Jesus aside and tell him like it is. So Peter took him aside and he began to rebuke him, and he said, God forbid it, Lord. This will never happen to you. And Jesus turned to Peter and he said, look, you get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You're not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's. Now, look, a couple of things. One, what Jesus is saying when he's telling his disciples this, he knows this is what his life is going to be about. He's aware. He's been aware that that's what he came to do. We know it's revealed in Scripture from the time that he was 12 there at the temple. Now, what was the effect of that? How did he view the Father, knowing the suffering that he would go through? Did he think of his heavenly Father as hating him, of being cruel to him? What did he think? Because look, I'll tell you again, nobody's ever suffered that much. Nobody. I don't care who you, if you're Viktor Frankl in the POW camps, it's not equal. I wish I could explain it like it was math. It's not possible for another person to hurt the way Jesus did. He bore the weight of the whole world's sins. More than that, he left heaven. This is what the word evil itself is describing: a lack. It is the gap between perfection and what is. That's what evil is. It's literally what it means. You're talking about a lack, a deficiency, a gap, right? So how many of us in here have ever been perfectly anything? Right. So the degree that we suffer is knowing the difference between the best that we've ever known and what we're experiencing right now. And I'm telling you, it's small. It's really small compared to what it is to leave the courts of heaven, to be the King of glory. Everything that thrills our souls when we just touch the outermost fringes of that, how it lights us up. That was his in full, and he left it to come down here into this mess, my mess, the mess that we made, and to hurt with all of that hurt. And not just that. Look, every day, I want you to be aware, nobody's ever been lonelier than Jesus. Nobody could understand him. When we hurt, we commiserate with one another. We have sympathy for one another. You get that friend that you know you can rely on, and you just spill your heart. And even, they don't have solutions for you a lot of times, but they care. And they'll sit there, and then maybe they'll cry with you. Now, someone has understood you. Your burden is diminished by virtue of that alone. It's powerful. Who could Jesus do that with? I mean, he can't do it with his disciples. They don't understand. I mean, it's like what Michael referenced earlier today. You know, Jesus told them, look, there's a lot that I wish I could tell you. You can't handle it. I can't put that on you. It would break you. You know, good and bad, honestly, both ways. So he was lonely. He was hurt. He was in agony because the pain. How do you feel when you hear what happened where that little baby, 18 months old, was shot and killed in front of their parents? I mean, when I felt like I'd been shot when I heard that today. I haven't been keeping up with the news. My time is so spoken for with study. I knew the headline, that's it. I hadn't heard the details, but I heard that and it pierced me. That's my heart. That's my hardened heart that loves imperfectly. What does that feel like to the perfect, pure love of Jesus here on this earth? And think of it. I mean, think of it. The pain that he said. See, that's what I'm saying. We don't know. I mean, we don't know. You can look at that for the rest of your life and you will never find the bottom. I don't think we'll even understand through eternity. I think it's a thing that maybe we could, well, like when you're married. You know your spouse when you get married, but it's not the same way you know them 40 years down the road. Right? That's a deeper kind of knowing. I think it's kind of like that. So the suffering that he suffered was immense, inestimable. How do you grasp it? Maybe through experiences in your life, you begin to get, glimpses? They're like child's sketches, they resemble the thing, what we understand. So Jesus, knowing this, his perspective was, this will bring about my glory, your glory. The reason he wanted the glory is revealed in John 17 as he prayed, Father, restore to me the glory that I had with you forever. I want them to see me in this glory. I want to share this glory with them. That is the point. It's the opposite of selfish. It's something good that he wants to share. That's what he's about. That's how he sees his suffering. You see, that's how he sees it. It doesn't make him angry with God. He expects it. He's armed with that knowledge. And he walks. It's like, I picture, how Superman would take off, you could just see. It's like he just bore himself that way. Open to hurt. He never covered up. He never protected himself, not from a single blow, not from an insult, not from one sling or not from one arrow. He stood there and he took it, and it hurt. But that's so that he could reach into your heart and my heart and bind it, because he knows what that feels like. He understands. So that's how he's looking at it. When he sees his cross, he sees the joy set before him. He sees us. He sees glory. That's what he sees. It's what his mindset is. Peter, hearing of the cross, he just heard Jesus say, the Son of Man must suffer and be betrayed. It's like Peter never even heard him say, and on the third day rise. He said that too. That's what Jesus was looking at. When Jesus said all that, Jesus was looking at, and I will rise. Because that's the point. And Peter, because Peter was looking at that matter through the flesh, his instinct was, I would protect you, Lord. I love you. I've left everything to follow you. And one thing that Peter knew, if he knew anything, he knew he was not an erudite man. He knew that he was not learned. He was not an orator or a rhetorician. That wasn't who he was. But one thing he knew was he could stand toe to toe. That's how Peter was. He was not afraid of a fight. He would step up. And so loving the Lord, his flesh, it allowed Satan to step in and speak these words, but he would do the opposite of embracing the cross, his flesh. That's what Peter was doing. Peter didn't say embrace the cross. Jesus was embracing it. It was the thing that was going to torment and torture and kill him, and he clung to it. Because he came to die. Because he came to make us live. Peter, in his place, in this moment, in the place where he was, he wanted to preserve the flesh. Well, what would that have accomplished anyway? Well, I'll tell you one thing it would accomplish. It would accomplish the end of the hope for the family of God. Who can be rescued then if there's no sacrifice? All is lost. Everything is sunk. That's one thing. You see, there's no good in the preservation of the flesh. None of us likes being on the cross. But it is a matter of where your focus is. And I notice now Peter, when he says, far be it, Lord, basically this is not going to happen as long as I'm standing here. God forbid it. So Jesus turned to him and he said, get behind me, Satan. And it's right. We won't look at it today, but it's amazing to me. It wasn't that much earlier that Peter said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Isn't that how it is? I think about that in life. It's so like that. I don't know how many times in my life I've had this marvelous mountaintop kind of experience where you feel you just explode with joy. It's like a long, deep longing fulfilled, like moments that we have at the feast and things of that sort. And man, it is like 12 hours down the road, or maybe the next moment, Satan can step right up and whip you around. It happens. So that's kind of an amazing thing. But notice when he said, "No, Lord," that was exactly Satan's line, wasn't it? I mean, wasn't Satan saying when Jesus went out to the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights and was being pummeled by the forces of Satan, he squared off with him personally? Didn't he say, I mean, wasn't his coup de grace, I mean, his last best attempt to bring Jesus down, wasn't it that message? Skip the cross. Look, just do things my way. When he says worship me, I don't think it means Satan was saying you got to bow to me. He's like, just look, let's do this thing my way. My way is a better way. You can have the world. I have it. I'll give it to you. Think of what that would mean. Skip the cross. Isn't that what he was saying? You don't have to go through that. Well, he's just saying it again. He's just using Peter to say it. And look, that's a powerful thing when you're looking at that, and we know it. I'll tell you something that I know about BUD/S, SEALs training, that they intentionally make sure that when you're out there on the cold beach during Hell Week, which is the worst, everybody says this is the worst part of SEAL training, that they will have you, it's very little sleep, they're always screaming, every attempt is made to disorient you, it's always pressure, 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 and they're doing this so that you won't break at war. That's the wrong place to do it. If you're going to break, the time to break is in training. That way you can weed out those who will stand up and those who would fall and then cost the lives of other people. You just have to train that way. But when they're doing it, during that time, one of the worst things everybody says is when they have to sit waist deep in the surf and link arms, and it's freezing. It's torture. They're on the verge of hypothermia. The whole time, they intentionally park these trucks where they've got hot coffee that is wafting out to where those soldiers are training, and maybe some hot donuts or something like that, something they can smell. Doors are open, lights are on. And the whole time that they're out there shivering, losing their minds with it feels like somebody's stabbing you. Have you ever been that cold? You know what that's like. It's just before you literally start to get frostbite and your flesh is dying. They take them right up there to the limit. And the whole time they're saying, listen, you don't want to go through this. You know what? You could just ring that bell right now. Nobody's going to say anything. That hot coffee is right there. The whole time they're making sure that they know there's a way out, right? It's important. It makes it harder. Jesus had that the whole time. We've all known what that's like when you're tested and tried. That voice whispers to you, doesn't it? You know, just let it go. Lay it down. Take the easy way out. It can be a great temptation. So that's not nothing that Satan is saying through Peter to Jesus. But he said, you're a stumbling block to me. You're not setting your mind on God's interest, but man's interest. That's exactly right. And what I mean to say, I think what the Lord means to say in bringing this up today is we need to look at life that way. It occurred to me when the Lord was setting me in this direction that we'd kind of heard a little bit of a primer. In training, they would call it a cue to set your mind. But before we left the feast, we were told, listen, just to be clear, Pastor was telling us, understand that, you're going to have suffering and hardship, and let's just set expectations. Let's just understand this is what we're wading into. And it is necessary for us to be aware of it because, well, it's very costly not to. It will cause you to hurt more than you have to at best. And at worst, maybe it'll take you out. It's taken people out. So, what Jesus says next, verse 24, is so powerful. He said, look, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life is going to lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And I don't know, how can you miss this? If you are following in Jesus' footsteps, what is Jesus' life? Isn't he always pointed at the cross? Isn't his every decision made in light of that fact? Doesn't he? I mean, he literally says it in the moment when he's in such grief and anguish. I mean, he says, now has come this hour. And what am I going to say? Father, save me from this hour. It was for this hour that I came. This is why I'm here. So he said, no, glorify your name. That's what I say. Receive the glory that you're justly due. So if we understand that, what do we think we're signing up for when we become Christians? It is the path. That's what it is to follow Jesus. You can't have Jesus without a cross. I mean, in a sense, you can't get to heaven without going through hell. That's the truth. And we'll all go through it. The Bible is clear. Jesus never backed off from telling. This is one of the times where he's telling his disciples this is how it's going to be. So none of us needs to be shocked or surprised by that. And he's saying, if you attempt to save the flesh, look, there are lots of ways you can do that. If the Lord reveals a pattern of sin, something that's rotten, maybe in your heart, that's where it is, it's in your heart. Well, you see it in a behavior, but the behavior is secondary. The heart is the root, the behavior, that's the fruit. That's how that works. So you see it. There are two responses you might have. You might want to protect yourself. Maybe you push that out of your mind and say, well, I'll just leave that out of my eye line. I won't look at that. And I'll do these other things that aren't bothering me so much and just let it sit there and fester. Okay, you can do that if you want, but here's what happens. It's like ignoring gangrene. Gangrene, when it begins, is a real threat to the little appendage, the little place that it is. But you can live. Your organism can make it through. You just have to take off the offending member, and you'll go on through fine. But if you ignore it, the whole you is going down. That's how that works. That's one of the ways that we protect the flesh. Or you can see it, and you can say, I want that to die. That's what the cross is for. Put it on the cross. And look, it takes so many different forms. For me personally, some of the things that were so valuable to me in crushing out deep-rooted sin and lies and putrefaction that had taken up residence and frankly been nursed by my own choices. And here I am with this seething, wholly corrupt cesspool of a heart before the Lord. When He came to rescue me, I was a mess. I mean, I'm not saying I'm perfect now, but He's done a lot of work. He's got more to do, and I'm on board with that. That's exactly what I want. So one of the things that was so pivotal for me was walking through my grandmother's last 6 years. It tested me in a way that I had not been tested, so many ways, and offered so many opportunities where my flesh had to die. It's giving up sleep. Look, I slept very little for about 6 years. That's hard. It hurts you. There's a whole cascade of things. It has an effect on your emotions, on your level of inflammation in your body. It's a powerful thing. It's one of those fundamental things of your physiological and psychological well-being. Sleep, diet, and exercise, that's the three-legged stool that your health and well-being sits on. So when you're talking about messing with one of those things, you're talking about something difficult. But it wasn't just that. It was doing battle with competing interests in family. And you know how that works. People who also loved my grandmother and me, but not everybody could be the primary caregiver, and decisions had to be made. And people are deeply vested in how those decisions get carried out or what they ought to be. And you find yourself in the middle of this maelstrom, and that's on top of that. But more than that, I'm saying it's an assault in so many ways on, well, it's very difficult to describe all of the ways. You all know through your own experiences. That was a very powerful crucible of about 6 years to effect change. And frankly, it was the preparation for me to hear the voice of the Lord. I don't think I could have done the one without the other. I don't. It was necessary. And those blows that hurt so much, that cleansed me, I wouldn't trade a thing for being able to hear our Father's voice. Not a thing. So valuable. So I would go through it a million times. I was telling him that this morning in the shower. You'll laugh at me, but yeah, I agree with Michael. And if it was Michael, I think it was, he was saying prayer is something that you do that all the time. Really, prayer is home base, isn't it? You know, that's what I used to tell my students. Listen, I visit your world, I live in mine. That's how that is. When I'm talking to you, I'm out for a visit, but whenever I'm not engaged in something else, that's time with the Lord. That's time when I can talk with Him. And I don't always have to be saying anything. Prayer can very much be an attitude. You connect like sitting next to someone that you've been married to for 40 years. You don't have to say something, you're connected. You know, the conversation ebbs and flows, but you understand what the other, you are in communication, right? So I do this in the shower. I make up goofy songs to the Lord from my pure heart. I just, right on the spot, I thank Him for my dog Buddy, because Buddy makes me happy. I thank Him for a warm house. I thank Him for hot water that feels so good and clean water, you know. It's such a powerful thing, and I can have that at any moment, unbroken. Another moment, I think, that was that powerful was the breaking of my health, which happened really mostly prior to the time I was taking care of my grandmother. Some of it overlapped. But you could not have designed a more systematic way to break a person down. I had to die. I mean, it was the next to death, that would have been the only next step, really. It was to the place where I could do nothing. And it was a very dark time. There was very little hope left. But you know, it's impossible, honestly, to know the God who heals you until you've been very broken. That's how you know. Oh, you might intellectually know. Of course, you can know. But again, as we heard today, it's a very shallow thing, an intellectual kind of knowledge. It's an extremely deep thing. In fact, an eternal and unbreakable thing, the kind of knowledge that you know from your heart with the Lord. And, you know, I don't have to list every one, but just on reflecting on those things, I see there were many times, and I'm no different than any human being. I'm like David. I see him doing it. Or like Job, where you get to the end of your reason, you know? At the beginning, it seems to follow that pattern, frankly. At the beginning, you're like Job. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That's easy. Now let it grind on a little bit more. Let it begin to rob your sleep. Let it work on you relentlessly, where there's no release, just pressure. You know, you go from pain to pain. You feel that you're in a spiral. It's like you're clinging to driftwood in the middle of a typhoon, in the middle of the ocean, and it's dark, and it's cold, and every breath is a torture. So you're in that moment. And as it grinds on, then all right, we start stripping away some things at this point. Now you begin to say, well, I don't understand. I can't take this. I won't be able to bear this. I'm not going to get through this. You don't care. You don't love me. You're not looking out for my best interest. You won't rescue me. You don't even talk to me anymore. Where did you go now that everything is so messed up? You will get there. It's an honest place. And the Lord will answer you. He will come to you. But you have to understand that's a cross. It's killing your flesh. It's killing your vanity. It's killing your arrogance. It's killing your lack of trust, that cold lack of trust that we have in the Lord. Because you know when you don't trust Him, you're impugning Him. That's your Father. Right? You see? It's such a great exchange, the way that He uses it. The cross is our gateway to joy. That's why the Lord allows it. It's hurting Him more than it hurts you. Do you think it's an accident that we have recorded in the Bible all that great cloud of witnesses experienced? The Lord keeps a record. The Word says that He keeps our tears in a bottle. None of it is wasted. All of it is purposeful, meaningful, carefully managed moment by moment to bring about glory. Jesus saw that right, and He tells His disciples that, which means that He's telling that to us. We find our lives on the cross. And if you cling to anything that represents flesh, our flesh wasn't designed to be forever. It's temporary by its nature. Like atoms and matter, it will all melt with fervent heat. You can't look at it without seeing it's a temporary thing. It had a finite origin, and it will have an ending. If you invest in it, when it talks about, look, if you try to save this, imagine that you are clinging to driftwood. Well, cling to it then. Hold on to that driftwood. And when the rescue ship comes cruising by, you can't let go of your driftwood, because that's for sure. You're holding that. That rescue vessel is right over there. You'd have to give it up in order to get on board. Well, you can do it. Cling to it. And you'll go down into those murky depths, and it'll all be over. That's what it is to cling to this life, or any part of our flesh, or any part of our old identity. And getting on the cross and letting that die, well, that's getting on board. That's going into Jesus, our rescue vessel, and becoming as He is. So that's what He says. Look, if you make the effort and you look at things this way, and you try to keep this present physical life, you'll lose it. But if you give it up, then you'll find it. In verse 26, what is the profit for a man if he gains the whole world, but he forfeits his soul? What would you give in exchange for your soul? The Son of Man is going to come in the glory of His Father with His angels, and will then repay every man according to his deeds. Two things. One, that's Him saying, this is the point. He's talking about His cross. And then He's telling them, you got one too. And He's saying, my cross is going to bring me to glory. You don't understand my glory, but you're going to understand it. Oh, there were a few standing there that would see it a little bit. That's how Jesus saw it. And that's how we need to see it too. It is, I don't know how to say it. It's the mechanism through which we give up what is killing us, what we want to be rid of, and we receive what is our life and who we're supposed to be. It's an act of love for God to give us the suffering that He gives. It's an act of trust for Him to give us the suffering that He gives. It's not pleasant. It's not. It's painful. And look, it's probably not effective unless it's longitudinal in some sense. I find it easy to bear with a light momentary affliction. I'm good at, temporary intense bouts. What's harder is long grinding ones, right? So, the Lord's not making a mistake when He gives you something that lasts a while. I'm 27 years old. I've been in bad health for 27 years. The moment I became a Christian, my health fell apart. And there are aspects of living in this physical body that they grind on me. It just grinds on me. I'm not worse off than anybody else that you know. I don't know what other people are going through. I'm just telling you this because why, Lord, why? Why would you do that? Why does it have to be so hard? It makes everything hard. You understand? It's hard to plan. It's hard to commit to a thing. You don't know if you can do that thing or not, right? Everything goes up in degrees of difficulty if you can't count on your health. Why then? Why, Lord? I know you love me. Why would you do it? Well, I think the answer is pretty clear, isn't it? Why? Why did He allow Jesus to suffer so much for so long? Why? Oh, maybe to heal me. Real healing. As Brian likes to say, maybe it's not about the healing, maybe it's about the wholeness. Maybe this is how God receives glory. Like Jesus described the man who'd been blind for 40 years. Why? Did he sin in the womb? Can you do that? Or did his parents sin somehow? It's not about that. This is a stage that was prepared where I could display my glory, and what an honor, right? So I see the benefit of what was mentioned earlier today. It's in our weakness that God's strength is made perfect. Because the truth is, when we don't have weakness, what do we tend to do? Well, we trust ourselves. That does not go anywhere good. Never goes anywhere good. But what never goes anywhere bad is trusting the Lord, knowing that you need Him. Look, it's hard to pray as Jesus instructed us to pray. Give us this day our daily bread. When you got a pantry full of bread. I mean, it's important that we get to the end of ourselves, that we get pierced through with many sorrows. It's important for the work that the Lord is doing, and I'm happy about it. That's what I was going to say. Thank you, Lord, for giving me back my train of thought. It really bothered me that I walked away and I couldn't remember it. I told him this morning in the shower, I'd do it 1,000 more times. I'd do it 1,000 more times because I know what's coming. I'm thankful for it. Thank you for it, Lord. Thank you. I see the goodness. I see your kind intention in it. I see what it did for you. Look at that. The greatest suffering that yielded the greatest blessing. We're saved because He suffered. Father suffered, Jesus suffered. His suffering brought Him to me. That's why I know Him, because He suffered. My suffering brought me to Him. I mean, I was too proud, too full of myself, too arrogant, too self-reliant, too blind and stupid, until He began to afflict me a little bit. Those wounds healed me. I'm not sorry. I'm just not. I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the cross. I'm thankful that He gave me one. And what else? Look, that's personal. But consider, what is the impact of your life? Well, there's an impact now. We're all impacting a lot of people, more than anybody in any other time in history when you think about it. Because we have the people that we impact as we interact personally. And that's no small amount, because maybe there are 100, say. Say there are 100 or so in the circle of your immediate influence, including the clerks and tellers at Lowe's, or the people that you know at Walmart, or those people that you go to school with, or whatever. But each one of them has an equivalent circle, so now what? Now you take that up by another 100. What are you talking about? That's an influence of millions. Now take that out one more. So that's bigger impact now than you think. And that's real. But beyond that, we're online. We're on our phones. I mean, we get likes and messages from people in Africa and Europe. I mean, there's a sense in which we impact the rest of the world today. But that's not it either, is it? The beloved Apostle Paul, who we were talking about, who's a huge hero of mine, he deeply impacts me. Job, that we talk about, he still encourages me, and I see that faithfulness. Or Joseph. That's a long time down the road. Well, what about your life? I mean, it's a deep, deep thing when you consider it. So perhaps that's why. It's important, and it's advantageous for us to see it in that light, because that's the true light, you see. That is actually the light. And the second part of it is that He says, I'll repay everyone according to their deeds. You'll get what you want. That's the truth. I came up for anointing last Sabbath, I believe, and Lord directed Pastor to have Brian pray, and he said something which has been said many times, of course, but he was just saying that healing's on the table. It's on the table. It's there, isn't it? And, it had me thinking, it's on the table for us. The end of our lives, the result. When I say end, I'm talking in this sense, the outcome, the result, the effect, okay? I don't mean the terminus. I don't mean when it stops. That's on the table for us. We get to pick. It's like a smorgasbord. We can pick. How close to the Lord do you want to be? Well, He's not stopping us. Look, it's up to me, isn't it? I can rob Him in a million ways every day if I choose to. And in so doing, I can sow to the flesh. I can increase my torment and misery. I can steal from everyone that might have been warmed in their cold, dark, desolate, lonely souls by that light of the fire of the love of God inside my heart. I can do that. I can steal that from him. Or it's completely up to me, isn't it? Whether I will yield up my whole heart to him. I mean, not just at an appointed time. I like appointment. Structure is good. I'm not people who know me know I'm not anti-structure. If anything, I still need to loosen up a little bit. I recognize that. I'm working on it. But you see what I mean? In other words, the level of joy that I wish to experience in this life. I'm talking about irrespective of suffering, clearly, in the context of this message today. I'm not saying I'm not interested in diminishing the level of the suffering that will bring glory to God. Only unnecessary suffering. I want none of that. I don't want to bring any extra on myself. So aside from that which is productive, but I mean to say, there's something very interesting that the Bible reveals about Jesus. It says that he was a man who was well acquainted with sorrows. We thought about that. But it likewise says that he was anointed with the joy, the oil of gladness above all of his brethren. Nobody's been more joyful. That's simultaneous. So it's up to me, isn't it, how much joy I have in the Lord, how much fun I get to have with him, how deep and how rich and how abiding that is. It's on the table, I'm saying. It's a choice that I get to make. And sometimes I think, to be completely honest, Lord, I'm worn out. I'm worn out and it's been enough, Be merciful to me and just let me finish well, but let's wrap it up. And I'm not saying that I have some morbid desire to die. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that any person who is suffering thinks about, I wish the suffering was over. That's a normal thing. Everybody thinks about that. And in those moments, it seems always to come around to this place, but Lord, don't diminish not one bit from the level of glory that you plan to receive out of my life. Because how quick is it? Paul called it all light momentary affliction. That's the real perspective. That's the genuine perspective. That is actually the truth. All of our suffering is light and momentary. Think of it this way. All of our lives are very momentary. That's the real truth. In eternity, back up to eternity past, there's no evil, there's no pain, there's no suffering, there's no war, there's no conflict. None of that. It doesn't exist. It's not real. And then in a moment, Satan rebels against God. He creates a lie. He nurses a lie. It infests and inflicts him. And then he begins to spread that out to the angels. And even while it is festering, corrupting and perverting and twisting and tormenting, and then they fight against God, there is open war. Now sin, now evil, now pain, now that perfect joy and harmony that has always been, now it's ripped and torn apart. And all creation is plunged into this chaos. And we see in Genesis, God steps into that chaos and he begins to restore some order to give to Adam and Eve. And then they fall under Satan, and exactly the same thing happens in this human family and on this earth. It's corrupted. And now what we know is the truth, but it's going to be over so soon. And even looking back to the beginning of mankind, I can't look back to when Satan rebelled. I don't know where that is in time. I don't know how to do that. But Adam and Eve were here close to 6,000 years ago, somewhere in that neighborhood. Not down to the day, but that's a good general way to look at it. Jesus will be coming back very soon. I don't know how many days, but I know it's the season. He's made that plain. So consider eternity past, 6,000 years, eternity future. That's after Satan and everyone who won't part with him, cast into the lake of fire, utterly destroyed. then there won't be any more tears. There will be nothing but as it always was. So all suffering, when you see it in its right context, is very short. And eternity, well, I mean, it's very, very long. So all of our suffering is light and momentary, and it is yielding, I mean, as Paul calls it, an eternal weight of glory that won't dissipate. It'll never fade. Turn with me, if you will, to Hebrews 11. We'll just go sort of to the end of that. This is how it is with all of those faithful ones who went on before us. All right, so I'm going to pick up in 32, but you know all that precedes it. You understand what he's talking about, and I do think Paul wrote Hebrews, but it's not important that it was him. God wrote it. So he says here in verse 32, "What more shall I say? Time will fail me if I talk about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions." Now, before I go on with this list, I don't know if it escapes your notice. I know that it has mine. If you say that you escaped, let me back up. If you conquered kingdoms, that means you went to war. War is a hardship. Nobody comes back the same. There's no person who is uninjured. I don't remember exactly how the saying goes. Everybody comes back wounded. The people with visible scars and without them. I learned that from my uncle who'd experienced combat. It does violence to your person to go through war. You're never the same. Just as the people who survive being shot in that little church, they will never be the same. Oh, they can go on, but they'll just never be the same. They'll always bear that. So as we're listing, the Lord is listing about these ones who have gone on before us. These are the ones that in the next chapter, as we'll see, form that great cloud of witnesses. Don't miss the suffering. That's what I'm trying to say. This great legacy that they leave behind us, they gain it through their suffering. So, when you conquer kingdoms, that means you have to experience war. Shut the mouths of lions. You know what that's talking about, right? That's Daniel. Who among us would not be utterly bewildered if we were, schemed against by elements and factions that hated us without a cause? For doing what? For just being faithful to the Lord. That's what happened to Daniel. And they tricked the ruler, actually, because he liked Daniel. But he was bound at this point, so he throws Daniel into a den of lions. Y'all, that happened. It's not a story. I've been in the presence of scary animals before. Mostly it's just like I've thought I've been close to a bear. I don't know if I actually was or not, but I'll tell you, it made my hair stand up. I had some at the time. Or when I was a kid, when I was there with a dog that looked scary and vicious, I'm telling you, every part of you is affected. It's like getting physically hit, that fear. Daniel went through that. That was suffering for the sake of just doing something right. And it's not the end of his suffering. Read his life. It's all suffering. It's all suffering. I mean, he didn't draw an easy breath. Like every prophet, he suffered from the time that he was called. And it's precious in the Lord's sight. Look at the things that he revealed to him. What a powerful impact Daniel had on my life. At a pivotal time when the Lord was calling me to ministry, Daniel was the one that saw me through. Just like David was the one who gave me my first steps. It's like, I used to have this German shepherd named Sambo. She was a great dog, called her Sam. I was just a kid. I couldn't walk yet, so I had to be very young because I walked early. But Sam would let me grab onto her, and how she was that patient, I don't know. But I would grab her to be steady and help me to walk along, right? Well, I lost my train of thought. You'll have to forgive me. Yeah, it's not coming back to me. Love Sam. Great dog. Okay. Yeah, I know, but I don't know why I connected those two things. I'm sure that. Yeah, it's, I don't know. The connection is eluding me. But continue on. When it says that they became strong in war, it means war, it means conflict. Put foreign armies to flight, it means the same thing, you have to understand. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Look, to have that joy, you've got somebody you love has to die. Amen. And you know that's painful. I mean, we know what that's like. My father's death recently, it hit me much harder than I expected it to. Because I figured I hadn't known him that long, really, you know. But the bond was deeper than I had understood. And I miss him, you know. I'm looking forward to seeing him. I don't know what he understood, but, you know, I know that the Lord is a righteous judge, and he loves him as much as he loves me. So I wonder if he's not just going to have his eyes opened at that time. The Lord knows. I don't know. But that means that you have to suffer, you see. That's what I'm saying. Others experience mockings and scourgings, chains and imprisonment. I mean, we ought to be clear. It seems like a very foreign thing to us because we live in a bubble. That's the truth. This place, both in time and in the world, is very rare. Very rare. We're in a bubble. We're protected from realities that are in 80% of the world. That's how people live. You know, where you die from wholly preventable diseases, you know, like amoebic dysentery or something like that, where you struggle and scrape and survive, and maybe your life expectancy is 40 or 50 years old, and, you know, you don't get, we don't even understand. It would shock us to see how that is. So I don't know that we understand how true this is in terms of being a Christian now in this place. But there is a cross even in this bubble. And in some ways, I think it may be more exquisite. It doesn't take that form of roving bands of men with machetes who are going to hack you up. That happens in the world, you know. Or where you're put in the gulags, like what happened in the Soviet Union. Or where you're rounded up into the ghettos, like that happened in Germany, you know. But now in this culture, there's so many. There's that seething evil that's always tempting you to become complacent, to trust in the riches that you have. More people fail that test than who fail outright adversity. That's the truth. It's something that I think is the reason that the Lord moves pastors' hearts so often about this. Don't be complacent. Don't you become apathetic. Now, we're moving on. We're moving. We're marching. You know, we're not living here. You know, maybe, yeah, the tent was set up here, but we're moving. You know, I think that's partly why. And two, the putrefaction that is really everywhere, all over the place, all entertainment, all of the songs, it's so wicked. That's part of the cross that we bear. And it's important for the Lord to receive glory. So there are mockings and scourgings, chains, imprisonment. They were stoned, sawn in two, tempted, put to death with the sword, and then went about in sheepskins and in goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated. I don't know what it means there about sheepskins and goatskins. I've heard people say maybe they're referring to what they did to Christians in the Colosseum, where they dressed them up like animals of prey and released real live lions and just let them tear them to shreds. But regardless of what that actually means, it's talking about suffering. Our great cloud of witnesses follow in Jesus' footsteps. They all had crosses. They lasted their entire lives. And then they did what was so remarkable about, was it Jacob, who worshiped as he was dying? Or like Paul, who gave his last full measure of devotion, a drink offering, poured out his last precious drop of blood out of love for the Savior. Well, that's what's at the end of our road, too. One way or another, we'll all draw our last breath. I mean, we may or may not be. Look, we're all martyrs, fast or slow. That's what I'm trying to say. Men of whom the world was not worthy. And that's the truth. You know that feeling, right, when you think on Jesus and the sacrifice that was made for you. One of the first things we think of is, Lord, I could never deserve that. I could never. And I still don't understand it. I don't know how to. Well, that's what the Lord's saying about each one of these, which is right, because that's Him again, dying again in each one of His beloved. That's Him. It's still His suffering. Who are wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, didn't receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be perfect. Now, there are two things. Gained approval. I always looked at that like the way that we use the word approval. Like, I want your approval, so I'm going to try to do things of which you approve. Okay, that's a legitimate sense of it. It's not really the point there. They proved themselves. Not like God said, yes, and I approve of you. You know, that's a good... No, they proved themselves. It's more like, so when Jacob became Israel, because then God knew who he was. He tested him in that long, endless night until sunrise. And through that pain and through that anguish, he came to know God. And God came to know him, right? Proving himself like that. They proved themselves through it. Well, what if we're doing that? Michael and I were talking just before services started. And I told him that I was reflecting on the fact that God is a consuming fire. The nature of who He is, it spells the end for anything that is impure. You know, think about what He said to Israel. Look, I can't be close to these people. I mean, I will reach out and I will destroy them. That's why He has to cast evil out of His presence, you see. And consider, what does that mean then? Look, even the stuff of our lives, it's either going to be burned up, like the wood, hay, and stubble, or it's going to be something that's been tried in the crucible, that's been struck repeatedly with hard blows and plunged into the fire until it becomes a thing that is pure, like gold or silver. You see, that's our lives. That's the process. And the Lord is coming. He is coming. So I don't know how much the fact that there will be a lake of fire and that those who are evil and who have not allowed themselves to be made pure, that they will be utterly burned up. What won't be in God's presence? Well, only that which is like He is. Only that can be in His presence and not be utterly destroyed. And another thing is that our commission is so great, as we heard Mama T pray last night. What we've been given, it's an astounding level of trust. I mean, if the president came to you and gave you the nuclear football and the codes and the keys to the White House, it would hit you. You mean the fate of the free world is now on my shoulders? One thing you'd know, that guy trusts you. That's one thing you'd know. Well, that's a very small thing, the world at this moment, compared to what's been put into our trust. I mean, the fate of God's family, the purpose for which He made the world, that's on us. And we're called to the most important time. It's a wonderful thing, and I still don't know what to do with it. But these great ones that we look at, and I know we marvel, I do, that they're not made perfect without us, that we've been given that privilege. Let's go on into chapter 12. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let's run with endurance the race that is set before us. So we're thinking about those witnesses, and we understand our course, it is filled with suffering. That's what we will do. That doesn't mean that there aren't moments of joy in all of those things. Not at all. As I said, there was nobody more joyful than Jesus. And you see that he liked to be at parties with people. He did. He would go all kinds of weddings and banquets. And that was one of the things that his enemies tried to use to accuse him. But, I don't know all that the disciples would have done. We know that they sang. We have some record of that. But I'm sure that they joked and laughed, and I bet you it was just such joy. When you come into the presence of a godly person, it's a joy. It's such a joy because it's the Lord who is there. Well, that was the Lord. So we have all of this suffering, but with joy. And that's what they've shown us. Every example, every one, understand, in that whole chapter, which is about faith, and faith boiled down just means trust the Lord. Well, that's where the proof of that pudding is found. You see that you trust Him when you're tested, when you're tried. So you lay aside the encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles us. That's what dies on the cross. That's what dies on the cross. All of those wicked places in our hearts. It's a slow death. It's an ugly thing. It's an implement of torture. And we feel it. It's right. You feel it. In those moments where you decide that I'm going to live in the Spirit, that I'm choosing against my flesh. Your flesh, it makes cadaveric spasms. It hurts. You feel that. There is a certain agony that goes along with it. And then there's joy on the other side at each one of those turns. So that's how you lay that aside. And that way you can run this race with endurance. In other words, look, it's like a marathon. The cross is not a quick death. Verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Well, what do you see when you do that? I see the cross. That's what I see when I fix my eyes on Him. I see His suffering. And it arms me against the suffering that I'm privileged with. The author and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him, and that's me and you, and that's that great countless multitude that Sarah saw in a vision. I can't remember the song. I think it was 10,000 Reasons, but whatever it was. Just an ocean of praise. That was the joy that was set before Him. And that allowed Him to endure the cross, although He hated the shame, and then to sit down at the right hand of the throne of God. It says in verse 3, consider Him who endured such hostility by sinners against Himself, so that you won't grow weary and lose heart. See, we got to do that, because if you don't, you will. To say, you have to fix your mind there. You have to remind yourself that. Because if you don't, you will not endure. It's necessary for endurance. And we don't have time to look at it, but what he says just after that, when he's talking about all of us endure discipline, which is not pleasant at the moment, but we know, even with earthly fathers, that it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness, and that they do it because they love us and they're trying to do something good for us. And I think we view that in terms of punishment and correction, which is a part, but it's a small part. Because what it means is training. What it refers to actually is training. When you think of the discipline of the Lord, think of what it is to be a disciple. Jesus rebuked the disciples. He corrected them. We just talked about one of those moments. That wasn't the main thing that He did. He walked out an example for them. He encouraged them. He walked side by side with them. It was all training. He gave them little responsibilities. He asked them hard questions. He brought them along. It's training. And when you get to that, where it says, and that at the end of this training, here's what it will result, and that actual word is where we get our word gymnasium from. That's what it means. We're trained through it. So just to review, Jesus was clear. He didn't shrink back from telling us that He was going to the cross. That's why He came. The cross is how that all of us have been saved. And then He said, just as plainly, you have a cross. We didn't see it in Matthew, but Luke says, daily you take it up. Every day for the rest of your life, and arm your mind. I mean, we didn't look at Ephesians 6, but I wanted to. You put Jesus on. Every one of those implements that is our armor is Jesus, the helmet of salvation. Jesus means salvation. Breastplate of righteousness. It's His righteousness that we wear. We don't have any of our own. Feet shod with the preparation of the gospel. Well, the gospel is about Jesus. We just wear Him, our loins girded with the belt of truth. Well, He is the truth. We just put Him on, and He is our protection and our strength. So he's intentional about the suffering that we will endure. It's for such a good purpose, and we ought to see it the way that He saw it. And then consider that great cloud of witnesses that He's given to us. All of them that we admire. They all had a share of suffering. Of course, it all belongs to God, but it's through that. Not just are you made into His likeness, because that's the only way we're going to see Him face to face. Not just that, but it's a rescue to all of those who will just reach out and grab hold of Jesus in your life. It's a platform on which you can work. So embrace the cross. Hallelujah.